Welcome to Destination Missions. This is a ministry of Continental Baptist Missions. One of the goals that we have in this YouTube channel is to be able to share with you the work that CBM is doing throughout the United States. And that work is being done through church planners. And so today we want to bring to you a church planner in Michigan over on the east side, over by Detroit. And today I have with me Bill Branks. And there's a couple of things we want to talk about. Welcome, Bill, to Destination Missions.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Why don't you share with us a little bit about maybe just as brief as you can, kind of how the Lord led you to Corktown. I know there's that's a special area in your heart. So share with those watching, and then just talk about some of the things the Lord has been doing through that.
Okay. Well, it's hard to keep it brief, but I'll try to hit the highlights. We spent 10 years in Chicago as church planters before the Lord brought us to Detroit, and Detroit's my hometown. A lot of people say, why in the world would you want to plant a church in the inner city of Detroit? And I say, well, I was born there. And somehow that's oh, okay, well, then they understand it. But I would probably do it, even though it's not my hometown. But, my wife and I just really felt like we wanted to enter cities when everybody else is leaving. And by that, I mean, Detroit had a population of over 2 million 20 years ago. It's down to around 700,000. And I think, well, people are just have been abandoning the ship, and the city was in bankruptcy for a while, but it came out of bankruptcy a year early. So they're turning it around, and my wife and I wanted to be in Corktown. Corktown is the oldest neighborhood in Detroit. There aren't any other Baptist churches, Bible-believing churches, in the Corktown area. There's some other hot spots of church planting that, for my opinion, they're kind of overpopulated with church plants. The district is an area, Midtown is an area where that's, when you come to Detroit, that's where you go, and all the rest of the neighborhoods are kind of avoided. So we wanted to not try to compete with other ministries there, but come to Corktown and be a neighborhood church. So when my wife, as we talked about where the Lord might lead us next, when my wife said, well, I think Detroit sounds like a good idea, I thought, okay, well, if you think that, the Lord has clearly done a work in your heart, so let's do it. And, I tried to tenderize her a little bit. When we were living in Chicago, we'd go to Tiger games when they play the White Sox, and then we'd come to Detroit to see some games. And she looked around Detroit. She said, well, that's not as bad as I thought. And that's a lot of people's, once they come to the city, it's better than they think. But the bottom line is, the people here, those that are left, and as people, the trend is changing. People are starting to come back to the city, and there are enough people here there. As the Lord told Jonah, I have people there. And that's true in every city. So whether it's a size of Detroit or a size of Chicago or either one, there's an opportunity for a neighborhood church, a small church, to have an impact on the local people. And we just, we saw the Lord leading us to Detroit, and He has really kind of paved the way financially and given us open doors all the way to put us where we're at right now.
What are, as you were talking about that, I know there's people everywhere, but being where you are, there's probably a reason that there wasn't churches there, but there are churches other areas. The challenges are a little greater, I'm sure. I've had the privilege of being to your church just once, but I really appreciated even just the location because of that. It's a neighborhood church. It's not in the kind of the center of where everything is. What are some of the challenges you've faced in that maybe are unique to whether it's Detroit or just inner city for maybe somebody who's thinking about planting a church in the inner city?
Well, inner city in general is difficult because of the people who come to church, and that doesn't mean that they're difficult, but their value system, their culture, what they believe about church, what they believe about the Lord is much different. And we spend a lot of time kind of drilling through what I consider just this callousness because people come to a church like our church, whether we were in downtown Chicago or now we're near downtown Detroit. People come because, well, I need to find answers. I need hope. I want God to bail me out of my situation. And so we're glad that they're there, but to kind of set their expectations about, what God can do for them and what they need to do for themselves, it's just very, very difficult because we see on a regular basis alcoholism, homelessness, all types of immoral living, and it's just a way of life. And of course, they don't see it as immoral. So, but they get into trouble and they decide that they want to come to church. Now, that's not everyone, but that's probably half the people in our church have some life-dominating issues like that, where they come in and they want us to have all the answers. And oh yeah, here's this Bible verse, and listen to this sermon, and you'll be in good shape. And it takes years of just gaining their trust and speaking truth in their life and loving them and trying to get them to realize that they can't be good enough to gain God's attention. And that's what they want to do. They say, well, I want to clean up my act before I seek forgiveness and salvation. And that's a real problem. And I think it's particular to the inner city. And that's just kind of the sin issue, the heart issue. There are cultures and microcultures within the city that they communicate differently. I just posted my latest post was walk a mile in my shoes. It's an article about people's perspectives. I was walking with an ex-gang member who came to know the Lord. He was at our church, and I asked him to walk me through his neighborhood. And as we were walking through, he was talking about his drug dealing days. And in my mind, I'm thinking, how could you ever do that? How could you even justify the risk and all of that? And he went into saying, well, both of my parents worked 50 hours a week at terrible jobs, underpaid, terrible conditions. They were discriminated against because they're minorities. And he goes, I watched my parents literally work themselves to death trying to provide an honest living for his family. And, with all of their work, they were making about $500 a week to meet all the family's needs. He goes, then I found out that I could make $500 in about an hour selling dope.
Wow.
And he said, so for me, it's just a matter of, it makes sense.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to you and I, Josh, because we have a different perspective on life. I mean, we have a biblical perspective. But from him and many others, they say this is just survival. And we have to, we think of that, his testimony, and we shake our heads and says, what a terrible decision for you to make. But we need to get to the point where we say, you know what? If I was in your position, I probably would have done the same thing. Right. We have to have that kind of empathy before we can really communicate to them the gospel. They they want to know that we understand their perspective in life.
Well, we forget, I think, so many times as Christians, we've been ingrained often, if you've been a Christian for any amount of time, the truth has been ingrained in us. And we often forget, something I remind the people in my church a lot is, if they're sinners, they don't know any better. If they're not saved, they don't know any better. And for him, that makes sense to him. Whether he even maybe knowing, well, this isn't right, but it's either I do this or I don't survive. And like you said, just having that empathy, that understanding, and saying, look, this is somebody that needs the Lord no matter what. And so we're not going to necessarily judge that. We don't have to approve it, but we don't judge it, and just love them.
We need to learn to communicate through it. And I think deep down, even this guy that told me about this, he knew that what he did was wrong, but it was just the most reasonable option. But, he came to know the Lord, and we start looking at life and our values through redeemed eyes, and then everything changes.
Right. And
but in order to get him to that point, I almost had to say, you know what, I get it. I understand why you did that. I'm not going to tell you that you're a terrible person for dealing dope. I get it. But that doesn't make it right, and that doesn't mean you stay there. It means you begin to work your way through it so you can get to the point where you can just really ask the Lord into your heart and really begin to see some changes in life.
And I think you talked about some of the culture, some of the sin, and what I'm beginning to understand is I just kind of look from the outside. obviously that sin is everywhere, but because you're in the city, it's that people are just concentrated. So you're going to get that. And then being right in the inner city, the culture is different. And that's kind of what I'm hearing too, as you're talking about this. If we're thinking about somebody who might be watching this video, who's thinking about becoming a church planter, and they're trying to decide where the Lord would have them, something they need to think about, especially what you're saying here, is where are they going to fit? You grew up in Detroit, and I believe the Lord's using that because you have somewhat of an understanding of the culture already. You spent time in Chicago. And so understanding the culture and knowing, is that even am I going to be okay with that? Am I going to be okay with talking to these drug dealers or whatever it might be?
Well, I think their perspective is we don't have to be them. We just have to understand them and not judge them. They don't, we had a children's ministry in the east side of Chicago in a largely gang influenced area, almost 100% Puerto Rican. And here I go in there, I'm this big white preacher, that walks in, and they're looking at me like, what in the world, but we started telling them what we're doing, and little by little, they understand and that I'm not them. I don't have a criminal background. I'm not Puerto Rican. I get it. I'm, whatever your definition of white privilege is, I probably had a piece of that. So, and I understand that, but they don't say, well, you can't understand us. They just wanted me to appreciate where they're at and to speak truth as objectively as possible, but being sensitive about their view of life, their perspective, their paradigm, and not say, oh, you're all wrong. I spoke at a kind of a halfway house. These are guys that are ex-cons that were transitioning back into society. And we met together to do Bible studies, and this was a rough crowd. I mean, they were good guys, but it was a rough crowd. And so when I was started talking, that was my first time. I said, listen, you're probably not going to be surprised at this, but I'm not like you guys. And I mean, the whole place just erupted in laughter. Like I was almost embarrassed. I mean, I was making a joke, but they were saying, yeah, you are nothing like us. I mean, but there, afterwards, he says, Pastor, that's okay. We don't want you to be like us. We don't want you to pretend, dress like us, try to pick up some of the street language. That's all fake. If we know that you genuinely love us and you're trying to speak truth to us, we'll listen. So any church planter who's looking at urban or even inner city church planting, there just has to be awareness that I need to understand. I need to do my homework about the culture, about these people, and ask the Lord to just give me a real love for them, and because we really have to become unaffected by the immorality, the promiscuity. I mean, it's a way of life. Right. It's not. I mean, they're unashamed of it. There's a fairly large gay community in Corktown, and we've been mildly persecuted for that because a couple of them got on our website and read our statement of faith and saw that I wouldn't do gay marriages. And well, he went over the edge. But it's because I'm the minority when it comes to how we think and how do we understand the word. So we can either go toe to toe with these people or say, I tell them, anyone who thinks differently, I say, you are always welcome in our church. I said, I'll never stop you at the door and say, oh, hey, you got a rainbow T-shirt on, you can't come in. That's exactly not what Christ would do. Right. I said, but that doesn't change what we believe and why we believe it. So again, I think a church planter coming in here needs to have that awareness that, people aren't going to have the same value system. My objective initially is building relationships. You're doing cookouts, you're doing door to door, you're inviting people to, hey, jump in our van, we'll bring you to church. It's like I'm all about building this relationship, building trust. When you have that established, their hearts and minds open up, so does ours, and we say nothing else here is going to impact our conversation, because I'm speaking truth to you because I love you. And I want you to open your heart and listen to me, and so we can get you to where you want to be, not only in life, but spiritually.
Well, I think you just hit on something that I've been saying quite a bit, and I know that you're definitely not planting a church in a foreign country, though for some of us country folk it might feel that way, just culture-wise. But what you talked about building a relationship, and they're not going to want to hear you until that. And I think that's where often we miss that in more of the established churches. We just want to just get them to church and preach the gospel to them, and instead of realizing, man, we've got to build a relationship with them. We've got to earn their trust. All the things you're talking about as far as dealing, reaching people in Corktown, it's the same everywhere. It should be the same everywhere, the way we approach that. And so that's encouraging to me to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. People think, well, I know the Bible well. I've got it memorized front to back, and I've had 15 counseling classes and on and on and on. So they think they can just march into Detroit or Chicago, or like you said, to some degree it is a foreign field. But there have been, when a missionary wants to truly go to a foreign field, they don't just jump on a plane and go over there. They spend months of preparation of the culture. But when an American church planter goes to an American city, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is when we look at how Christ interacted with the woman at the well, he crossed all types of cultural barriers. I mean, he jumped all over him immediately when he sat down and talked to that woman at the well. But he talked to her. He asked questions. He gave her time to speak. It was all about, obviously, he had the benefit of knowing everything he needed to know about her to communicate to her. But even as an example to us, he said, we can cross these barriers with the purpose of sharing Christ, but we need to take the time to ask for a cup of water, talk to him, get to know him. I mean, if that's Christ's example, we need to do that whether we're in an inner city or halfway across the world.
Bill, I could continue to talk forever here. I'm enjoying this conversation with you about ministry. You mentioned something, though, a little ways back, and you talked about you had recently done a post on walking. That's kind of how we started to get down this part of the conversation. Post about walking a mile in your shoes, or whatever the title of that was. I did see it in my inbox. I didn't get a chance to read that one yet.
That's okay.
But that comes from a blog. You have started a blog, and that excites me. Yes. For those of you watching who don't know who I am, I'm a pastor. I have the privilege of serving on the board of Continental Baptist Mission and helping out with their social media and YouTube. So it's kind of why I'm here. But that all started because as a pastor, I realized there's other ways that I can minister as well, outside of the walls through YouTube and my YouTube channel. And now, Bill, I've seen you kind of pick that up in the form of a blog. You want to talk a little bit about that and then tell people, maybe tell people how you got started, why, and where they can find that so they can read more stories. I love the idea because it's coming right from the heart of being an inner city pastor. Well,
I'm kind of an amateur writer. I'm trying to hone my skills. But the reason I got started, when we would go into churches, we're supported missionaries through CBM. So we're on deputation. We go into churches, and I like to tell what I call on the blog, true tales. I mean, these are true stories about how the Lord intervened in a situation, or just my experiences with real people, real situations, and try to bring some biblical truths out of that, what I learned. And I try to learn from every encounter, and this comes from 15 years of inner city ministry. And so when we go to these churches and I tell these stories, afterwards people come up and say, is that true? Was that a true story? I'm like, yeah, it was. And they always say, I'd love to have that in print. You ought to write that down, or you ought to write it, or you write a book. You hear all that stuff. And you kind of put it aside. But, the older I get and the more time we spend, in inner city ministry, the stories are starting to pile up. And
I've noticed you have no shortage. You post, is it a couple times a week, I think, and there's constantly stories. So
yeah, the true tales are once a week, and then I do a Psalter Saturday, I'll call it. It's a devotional on Psalm 119. It'll probably take me a year to get through 2 verses at a time. Some of those devotionals have some of those stories, but the Tuesday morning one, the True Tales, are all stories. And I've done, I think we're on number 35, and I haven't even, put a dent in the list, in the story list. But I started writing these just it's very cathartic for me just to write them and to rethink some of the situations and see and remember how the Lord worked. And sometimes when people push back and they didn't respond, I mean, there's some, from man's perspective, some failures where you just try to draw people to Christ and they push away and they start making bad choices. And we've had a few of those and we've seen the Lord work in tremendous ways. So I just try to highlight these people and the situation and how the Lord worked in me or in somebody else. So it's on this blog. I would love to be able to compile these at some point in the future into a book or a devotions book. And then, so on Saturdays then is the Psalm 119 devotional. And I'm hoping to maybe doing some very short daily devotionals when I get the time to read them. But right now it's just billbranks.substack.com.
Okay.
And that's a website. It is just for bloggers or writers. It's pretty basic, but and there's a point where you can share, you can subscribe. I've got a couple different options. We're reader supported, so
okay,
if somebody wants to subscribe, they can do that. If they want to contribute, they can do that as well.
Well, if somebody didn't get that, because it's a longer web address, I will put that right down in the description. That you can find that if you're watching it is in the description. You can find that there. And I would highly encourage you, just hit the subscribe button. That's what I did, and I get those emails delivered to me, and I enjoy reading those and have been encouraged by that. You talked about all these stories, kind of countless stories. How long have you been in inner city ministry between Chicago and Detroit?
Right after I graduated from seminary, we moved to Chicago in 2004. So we spent several months working with kind of a rescue. There was a church, and it was there to help the pastor there. But during that time, we were helping that. We were going downtown and just trying to establish a foundation. So after about 8 months at the suburban church, we moved downtown and started Bible studies, probably in, I would say, 2005. And we did Bible studies for a couple of years until we had, this was what they call a scratch start. And for you young church planters, I don't recommend that. If you can find a team of other couples other men that are diversely equipped, I think you can make a bigger impact sooner, and you don't have to wear all the hats. So anytime I get the opportunity, I mean, we invited people to come to the inner city of Chicago and the inner city of Detroit, but we didn't get any takers. Imagine that. But I know that there's folks out there that have a burden for it. So, but we started probably in 2007. We met at the YMCA for a while, and then the Lord gradually opened up opportunities for us. Again, we were very small. I told our people all the time, we're a little country church in downtown Chicago. And they liked that characterization, because we didn't want a mega church. We wanted 75 to 100 people who could get together inside the city like that. We were near Moody, so we had some Moody students that helped us out with worship. And so we were there till 2015, and then the Lord moved us to Detroit, and we basically started that over. We did our research. We felt the Lord was leading us to Corktown, and then we started Bible studies from scratch and just started the process over. But I want to say, we've been with CBM for about 15 years, and they've been very, very supportive of us. And there's a good balance of support, but yet they give you some autonomy, because no church plant is the same. And I try to stay away from church plant models, because that can get you into trouble. Because you don't know who the Lord's are going to bring, especially in the inner city. Yeah. I mean, you don't know who the Lord's are going to bring, and it's kind of like building the ship at sea. because you start this Bible study and you just open your doors and you see who the Lord brings together, and you build the church off of that. But that's where having a team is helpful, because if you have 3 or 4 couples that are called to a city, called to a church plant, I think it's helpful, and I know CBM would be very, very, they'd be encouraged to hear from the folks. So
well, and I think that's a challenge to pastors like me to get busy training up people that we can send out to help people like Bill and his wife and others. There's many through CBM that would be appreciative to have that help. Well, Bill, I appreciate your time today, and I trust people were encouraged by the work. Really, I'm careful, because we want to say, well, the work that CBM's doing, the work that you're doing, but really what we need to say, the work that the Lord is doing in Corktown through you as a tool, through you guys as a tool. And so as CBM, we're just privileged to be there to kind of try to be a support to you guys. And this was a great conversation. And I would encourage you, if you're watching this, go and subscribe to Bill's blog. It is encouraging. There's some entertaining stories, but some encouraging stories, some challenging stories, and allow the Lord just to use those to encourage you. And then while you're reading those, pray for them. Pray for their work in Detroit. I know they would appreciate that. If you are brand new to our channel here at CBM, we want to thank you for watching and just encourage you to hit the subscribe button. And then make sure as well that you like this video. That really helps the YouTube algorithms, believe it or not. And feel free to share this and encourage some other people to be a part of what CBM's doing. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.
Thank you.